Hello, it's Alex, the Bookybus. Today I'm going to be talking about summer horror book recommendations. Summer is fast approaching and the weather is definitely getting warmer, at least where I am. And I realised I'd never actually done a summer recommendations video, so I figured it was about time. And I have selected 10 summer horror books that I have personally really enjoyed and would highly recommend to you. And to my friends in the Southern Hemisphere, you can always save this video and have a watch in 6 months, and hopefully some of these might be books you'll want to pick up when summer rolls around for you. So I picked 10 books to talk about, and they're ones that I don't see many other people mention, so hopefully this will be helpful to find some lesser known summer horror gems. And most of them are vintage, so 1990s or earlier, but a couple of them are a bit more recent. And once I'd made my list of 10, I realised they kind of fit into pairs quite nicely of specific styles or subgenres. And the first two that I'm going to talk about fit into the folk horror genre. So first up is Water Shall Refuse Them by Lucie McKnight Hardy. This is set in the UK during the heatwave one summer in the 1970s. We're following a family who take a holiday in Wales in order to deal with the grief following the death of one of the children of the family. So we're now left with the mum and dad, teenage daughter Nif, and a younger son. And they're all having difficulty dealing with this tragedy. While they are settling into this countryside village in Wales, Nif ends up meeting up with a local teenage boy and they form a friendship. They both have quite dark interests, and there is some elements of folk horror and witchcraft involved. There are some rituals at play, and we're also following the breakdown of relationships within the family and how they are all processing the grief of losing the member of the family. This is definitely a dark one. It is disturbing in some places, also quite character focused, and especially on the character of Nif. We really get into her head and the ways that she chooses to deal with things. And the fact that it's set during a heat wave makes it perfect reading for the summertime. Next up is The Red Tree by Kiernan. This follows a woman called Sarah who is a writer, and she ends up renting this house in the middle of nowhere to be able to focus on her writing. And while she's there, she finds a manuscript written by someone else who spent some time here. And this other person was obsessed with an oak tree that grows on the property. So Sarah then becomes obsessed with this manuscript and subsequently obsessed with the tree. And there are some folk horror elements, some supernatural elements, some other things as well. I won't necessarily spoil any further detail, but this one is beautifully written. Part of it is in like diary format from Sarah's perspective. Some of it we get to read the manuscript that she has found. This one was just such a wonderful read. It is strange and unsettling and weird and brilliant. This is a really good one to sink your teeth into during the summer months. The next two I'm fitting into like a creepy category. These are definitely two titles that creeped me out quite a bit. First up is Deliver Us from Evil by Alan Lee Harris. This is set in a small town in Georgia, and some years previously a young girl was kidnapped and awful things happened, and the story then picks up in the present day, which is probably the 1980s, at least when the book came out. And we're following the townsfolk, and there's still the effects of this crime kind of tainting the whole area. No one's ever forgotten it, and people still carry what happened with them. And one of the characters we follow is a teenage boy who is the son of the local sheriff. And there's another teenage boy who turns up in town kind of unexpectedly. He has a bit of a mysterious past, and he has recently been adopted by someone in this small town. So part of this story is following the friendship between these two boys, which I really, really enjoyed. It was really well done. And then also we are following these really dark and awful things that are happening in the area. There's something called the Snake Well, which alone is terrifying. And yeah, maybe whatever it was that had kidnapped this young girl years ago is still out there. And this is genuinely one of the creepiest books I've ever read. It really got under my skin. It was very unsettling in places, and I just thought it was fantastic. And yeah, I don't hear nearly enough people talking about it, so a great opportunity to recommend it. I will say I'm not certain this was set during the summer months, but it definitely evoked a kind of hot setting, so I think it works. And next is Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco. This is a haunted house story of sorts, but definitely not your typical haunted house story. We are following a family who live in New York City. They are sick and tired of the heat during the summer and just the fact that it's so crowded and cramped. They really want to get away for the summer and get out of the city. And they end up finding this mansion out in the countryside, and it's available for a price that seems too good to be true. And of course it is. There's always a reason. Of course they end up taking the place, and one of the compromises that they make for the cheap price is that the elderly matriarch of the family that owns the building will be staying in one part of the house while the family move in, and they don't need to worry about her. They just need to make meals for her and just leave them in her, you know, annex of the building. That's all they need to do. Otherwise, the place is theirs. They can relax and enjoy the summer. But of course, things don't go that smoothly, and soon each of the family members start to become really affected by this house in different ways, and it starts to break down their relationships. It starts to kind of obsess and even possess them in certain ways. Yeah, this one is definitely very unnerving and has some creepy moments and a fantastic climax. So yeah, this one is wonderful. And it also has a really great film adaptation that I would highly recommend checking out. The next two I want to recommend are two coming of age stories. So they're both set in between school terms during those summer months, and each of them follows a boy who is dealing with some stuff. And first up we have The Voice of the Night by Dean Koontz. And I know he's obviously a mega famous author, but I don't hear The Voice of the Night talked about very much, so I figured it was worth mentioning here. And I think originally it was published under a pen name, Brian Coffey, but yeah, like most Koontz books, has been reissued a million times. Anyway, this is about a teenage boy called Colin. He and his mum move to a new area, and he's trying to get settled in before school starts in September, and he ends up meeting this other kid called Roy. Not only do they hit it off really well, but Roy is also like one of the most popular kids in school. So Colin, who is a bit more of the shy, nerdy type and has never really had a ton of friends, he thinks, oh, I've finally cracked it, you know, I'm in with the popular kid. When school starts, it's going to be great. Things are going to be different for me. But it turns out that Roy is a bit of a sociopath, and he ends up using and abusing Colin's friendship and need for friendship and acceptance against him in order to do things with him. These things get increasingly dark and violent, and yeah, Colin has to decide whether he's going to go along with it or whether he's going to stand up to the most popular kid in school. Roy definitely comes across as a bit like Patrick Bateman the teenage years, and yeah, is quite the fascinating character. And yeah, poor Colin gets caught up in some really awful things. And yeah, this one's dark and a bit disturbing in places. A really great read, and yeah, perfect for summer. And next up is Phantom by Thomas Tessier. This is about a 10-year-old boy called Ned. He and his parents end up moving to a remote area on the coast, and yeah, again, it's set during that time before school starts, so Ned is kind of left to his own devices to like explore the area. And yeah, he's a bit of a loner. He tends to retreat into his own mind and uses his own imagination to keep himself entertained, but that imagination can also lead to some scary things as well as fun things. And during his exploration of the area, he finds an abandoned building and also starts to experience some creepy goings on, and he feels like there's something out there that is out to get him, and it seems to feed off his fear and can also manifest itself in different ways. So you might be thinking it sounds a little bit like It by Stephen King, and yeah, I definitely found some similarities with it, but Phantom did come out a good few years before it did, so it definitely isn't a rip-off, but also I would still recommend it to people that enjoy it, because yeah, it does have a bit of a similar vibe in some respects. This one is much shorter. It's definitely not as sprawling or epic, and it's really focusing on one kid rather than a group of kids. It does also have a friendship aspect to the story, because Ned ends up meeting these two old guys that hang about in the area, and they are super sweet, and he forms a friendship with them, and it's just, yeah, very wholesome and sweet, and maybe made me cry. So there's that. But yeah, it's kind of a slow burn for the most part, but it does have some really effective creepy moments, and it also has a pretty trippy climax. So yeah, this one I don't hear nearly enough people talking about. Okay, the next two I'm putting in the fun category. So we've got, yeah, some fun horror coming up. And first one is Wait and See by Ruby Jean Jensen. This one definitely felt to me like could have been turned into a really amazing 80s horror film. Sadly wasn't. But this one is about a family, and they end up moving to a relative's ranch. And it turns out there was a teenage girl called Charlene who used to live there back in the 50s, and it was thought that she just ran away one day. She was a bit of a tearaway, and so yeah, she disappeared and no one really went to look for her because they just assumed she skipped town for whatever reason. But turns out she'd been murdered, and this whole time she has been chained underwater in the local river. And yeah, anyway, the present day now, so the 1980s, when the family moves in, one of the kids ends up finding the skeleton and unleashes it. So of course Charlene is now free to wreak her revenge on those who have wronged her. This one was my first ever Ruby Jean Jensen and got me hooked on her work. It's really fun. It has some great suspense and creepy moments, especially involving the skeleton. She also does a really great job with the characters. She's really good at children characters especially, and yeah, kind of uncovering Charlene's past and the sinister things that were going on there is really well done. Next up in the fun category is Blood Games by Richard Laymon. And this was also my first Richard Laymon, and yeah, kind of got me hooked on his work too. So this one is about a group of female friends. They've known each other since college, and when they graduated they didn't want to lose touch, and they decided that each summer they would have a get-together and they would take it in turns to choose the destination, but they would go away for a week so they'd be able to spend some time together and reconnect. And this year they end up going to a remote, abandoned lodge called the Totem Pole Lodge, and turns out there was some kind of massacre there some years previously. It's been abandoned ever since, and yeah, the place is a bit creepy. But they end up staying there anyway, because why not? They're just there, you know, to hang out and have fun together. But yeah, they end up getting stalked by someone who is out there watching them, and things just go from there. So this is a long one, but it reads very quickly, and it kind of goes back and forth between what's happening in the present day at the Totem Pole Lodge and the crazy situations these women are finding themselves in. And then it goes back to finding a little bit more about this friendship group. So it goes back and forth between, you know, the two different timelines. And I thought that worked really well. We really get to know these characters, and like I really became invested in them as individuals, and also like, yeah, as this part of this really good friendship group. And yes, of course, there are plenty of references to panties and rumps. It is a Richard Laymon novel after all, but it's just part of the charm. You know, this one, yeah, it gets crazy, it gets bloody, it gets violent, and yeah, it's a good old time. Okay, and the last two titles I want to talk about are YA horror, and first up is one by Lois Duncan, who is probably most famous for writing I Know What You Did Last Summer, so that would fit quite nicely for the summer theme. But I wanted to talk about another summer themed one of hers, which is Summer of Fear. This is about a teenage girl called Rachel. She gets on well with her family, she's got a great boyfriend, you know, life is good. And then her cousin, Julia, ends up, through a tragedy, ends up having to come and move in with Rachel and her family. And at first, things are fine, everyone loves Julia, she's very sweet, and they're all obviously very compassionate towards her after the situation that has happened. But Rachel soon sees a different side to Julia, which seemingly everyone else doesn't see or doesn't want to see. And every time something happens that ends up negatively impacting Rachel, she'll complain about it, she'll complain about Julia's behaviour, but it will always get brushed off and Julia can do no wrong. It even goes so far as to Julia stealing Rachel's boyfriend, and yeah, it's just a no-no. So Rachel isn't happy. She decides to do a bit of digging and eventually comes to the conclusion that Julia is a witch and she's been using witchcraft against Rachel this whole time. And as she tries to get things figured out and basically save herself from Julia, of course no one believes her. So this one had a relatable character with, yeah, Rachel kind of going through those typical teenage things, and had some good suspense, and of course, yeah, the witchcraft angle is really cool. And yeah, this one also has a film adaptation directed by Wes Craven and starring Linda Blair, which is also well worth checking out. So yeah, I recommend both. Okay, and last up, another YA title is Beach House by R.L. Stine. And this is one of my favourite point horrors. I have been rereading them over recent years, and this was one I remember enjoying back in the day, and is one that I think still holds up really well, and I still really enjoyed it as an adult. And this one, I know Stine is kind of known for his more goofy type of stories, but this one feels a bit more serious, and a little bit darker in tone. So yeah, definitely a bit more my cup of tea. And this one is told over two different time periods. So we start off in the 1950s, we're in this seaside setting, and we're following a group of teenagers, and there's a kind of prank that goes wrong type situation. And then we move into the present day, the 90s, and we're following a different set of teenagers who, yeah, are at this seaside setting, and they find this beach house that seems to have been abandoned for some time. So they go investigating, and of course some strange things start to happen, and yeah, things might turn deadly. So yeah, this one I really liked because of the 2 timelines. I thought that worked really well, and yeah, obviously without spoiling anything, I really loved how the different elements came together. So yeah, beach house, perfect for summer. So those were my 10 summer horror book recommendations. I hope that you enjoy them if you decide to pick any of them up and give them a try. And if you've already read any of them, I would love to hear your thoughts. As you can probably tell, my favourite way to spend the summer is either indoors or in the shade wearing lots of sunscreen. So however you like to spend your summer, I hope you stay safe and have fun, and yeah, read lots of horror. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!